Hey guys, thanks for watching. Today we're looking at our food forest plans. That's episode 5 coming up next. Alright, so before we start this video, the first thing that I want to tell you guys is that, okay, this is a disclaimer. I've never done a PDC. I don't claim to be a permaculture design consultant in any way, but I have tried to integrate some of the physics that I've learned over the years into how to go about planning, I guess, a food forest. And in general, I would say that our property has moved from, you know, no permaculture to at least integrating some ideas in permaculture and trying to stack functions on things. So, kitchen waste to chickens to compost to back to the garden. These are all kind of processes that we've tried to integrate into our garden. Now, moving forward, of course, the choice was to try to integrate more permaculture-based food forestry in our garden because, most of our food sources were actually fairly laborious. And although I do realize that, yes, I mean, a food forest is not going to take care of itself, at least in the first few years, that eventually some of the food will be kind of more passive. And, the food forest will change. In certain years, it'll produce certain amounts of food. Other years, it'll produce different things. But in this video, I'm going to talk a little bit about our choices, how the forest is kind of broken up into a bunch of different parts, because it was really hard to kind of dedicate one big piece of land to this, but I had all kinds of little small pieces of land that could be dedicated towards planting tree guilds. So the forest is more of groupings of guilds, I would guess, is the best way to describe it. And I'm going to show that plan in a few minutes and talk a little bit about species that we've chosen and some of the pioneer species that we're going to use to kind of jumpstart this process. So when we originally designed the property, there was southern coverage in mind. We actually built a passive house when we moved here. We were thinking very much about energy usage, potentially with the possibility to go net zero. Although we haven't moved in that direction yet, we do have the property arranged in such a way to kind of capture as much solar gain as we can in the winter, and things like shade structures and whatnot over the southern facade of the house actually help keep the house passively cool, although we do use some energy in the summer for cooling. But overall, the house actually uses a lot less energy than most homes. So that was one of the things in mind when we designed the property. The other thing that we designed into the property was our kitchen garden. And while the kitchen garden also serves as our garden for long-term crops for storage, and those are all actually on the south side of the house, which is exactly where we would want them. Somewhere where we're going to get lots of sunlight. Lots of sunlight means lots of exposure. It means lots of photosynthesis. It means lots of big plants. And that was really all it was about, and being able to store those things. So in today's video here now, we're going to switch over. We're going to look at the permaculture zones, I guess, as they would be defined according to people who are in permaculture. And they're really just loose. I mean, they're just ideas that zones are kind of areas in which certain tasks or certain things are contained, and they're areas that either may be managed or unmanaged on your property, for example. And depending on how often you kind of occupy those spaces would determine what zone, I guess, gets defined. So we're going to switch over now so that you guys can see kind of a loose zone plan that I've done up, that I kind of had done up maybe 3-4 years ago in my head, but it was never ever on paper. All right, so I've now moved over to our permaculture master plan, I'll call it. Basically, it's our drone shot. And superimposed on top of that are these colors, and the colors basically represent zones, and the zones are basically defined by how much time, let's say, you spend in a certain area doing certain things. So our zone 0 is our house. Our zone 1 really encompasses the places that we will go to on a pretty much daily basis, let's say at least during the growing season, and potentially every day even during the winter. So for example, the area with our chickens, the area with our greenhouse, potentially the area with our cellar, depending on what we're getting out of here in the winter, and of course our kitchen garden area here, although some of this yellow area is used for that also. So I would say that kind of zone 2 and zone 3 are really kind of both kitchen garden and storage crops, and areas that aren't visited, on a daily basis necessarily. Zone 4, I would say, are areas that are visited maybe every few days, every 3 to 4 days or longer. And well, the unmanaged zones, honestly, they're just areas that are mostly treed and they're left wild and they become kind of wildlife corridors for animals and whatnot. So that's kind of how I see the zones for our plan. Now, what you may notice about this particular plan is that it's really stretched out in certain areas. So for example, our zone 2 is not nice and compact. It follows the south face of our yard. This is kind of where we wanted to have our vegetable garden, and it made sense because it was the flattest area on our lot. It also was the area that had most solar coverage at the time we moved in. There's very little in terms of shadow along that tree line in the summertime, so this area gets anywhere from 12 to 16 hours of sun a day. It's a great spot for actually, growing vegetables. Likewise, our greenhouse down here, it almost gets full solar coverage with the exception of shadows from a few trees down in this unmanaged zone. But to tell you the truth, in the summertime, it's a bit welcomed anyway because we do have, quite a bit of heating here in the summertime. So in any case, this is kind of the plan. And so this was where the house had to go. So we had to work around that. And I think that looking at it now, we wouldn't have changed much because there's not much you could have changed with it. All right, so this is a windrose diagram, and a windrose diagram really just shows you in percentages the amount of time that wind is coming from a certain direction. So you can see by looking at this diagram that the wind is mainly always coming from the west. Luckily, I have a fairly large windbreak on neighboring properties here and here and here. Now from the southwest, we got all of this area. There's almost nothing along my own tree line. I have talked with the neighbor, and the plan is, using this diagram, is to set up a living windbreak on the neighboring property, and the neighbor seems open to it, given that some of the shelter belt trees will actually be fruit bearing. So let's move on. We'll have a look at the winter, I guess fall diagram, and see how this compares to the spring summer windrose diagram. So here is the fall winter windrose diagram superimposed upon our master plan, and we can see that a large amount of wind comes from the west, but there's a lot also coming now from the northwest. We're nice and shielded here. The north, we're also fairly shielded. There's some trees here that help shield from wind from this direction. On the south and the southwest side now, there's proportionally more wind than there was before. So in the winter and fall, we end up quite a bit of southerly wind and southwesterly wind. So once again, having some sort of wind breakdown in this area would make sense. So this is the master plan. I'll show you a key to, I guess, all the colors, what the color circles are representative of in a while. So these are the distinct food production areas. So in area 1, really the pioneer species that we're talking about bringing in to help kind of build soil and build fertility and chop and drop are sea buckthorn berries, and that's what we're seeing here in the pink. And I'm expecting that these guys, you know, are going to be mainly just used for chop and drop. Early on in the lifetime of the forest, you know, they will produce and we will actually use them for berries while the other species tend to grow larger, which will be plum, apple trees, cornelian cherries, and these blue ones here are hascat berries, which I already have. The purple ones are service berries. I've chosen a bush variety here so that you don't actually overtake any of the other trees. They will always stay kind of low and a little bit below, I guess, the canopy of the plum and the apples. And the idea is really is that this is one of these kind of, you know, stacking in the food forest where your edge is going from kind of larger trees down to smaller bushes, and each one of these will have gills. The gills I'm still working on, and really for right now it's really just about defining the map for where all the trees are going to go. So I think I've achieved that here. So in area number 2, we're looking at a purple robe locust here, which is a nitrogen fixer. It's going to be mainly used for chop and drop. I know that it does sucker, but I'm willing to put up with some of that, knowing that I can, you know, build fertility in this area for our chestnut. Another nitrogen fixer we're looking at here is gummy berry, and we're also looking at the pink, which is a sea buckthorn. So there's lots of ways here to use these trees to prune them down to actually, you know, mulch them and turn them into fertility for our chestnut. And as the chestnut grows, and it's going to grow fairly big, you know, these pioneer species will tend to die back because I'm going to mainly use them for chop and drop. Likewise over here, I'm talking about sea buckthorns, and like I said before, these are their function is chop and drop. Out along the front, we're adding a tree line of spruce, and along here to add some additional windbreak. It's probably going to take 20 years for these trees to grow, but you know, we have some time still, so my plan is to just wait it out, and hopefully, you know, we'll see some good growth on those now that we have it mulched and there's no competition with grass and other plants. In this area, we got a lot of stuff going on. Some of it is thicket forming buffalo berries. We're adding another couple spruce. We're looking at Asian pear, service berry here. This is a Illinois everbearing mulberry. We're looking at mulberry trees down here. We're also looking at hazelnuts, likewise hazelnuts up here, as well as apple trees. We got gummy berries. We got loads of these gummy berries around. They're a great, I think, sacrificial tree. They're going to grow fairly fast. They're a nitrogen fixer. We can chop them and drop them and, you know, help build fertility in those areas. Likewise, another plant for that is autumn olives. Yeah, they're thicket forming. I kind of hope that they are actually, because I want to create some windbreak here in order to kind of get these spruces to start to grow. These spruce will grow eventually fairly large, and they'll help shield a lot of this area from incoming wind from the south. Building in layers here to prevent wind from coming into the property or to divert in certain areas. Likewise here, that's why that linear, I guess, arrangement of trees is placed here to kind of create some continuity with the present tree line, hopefully to be able to deflect some of the wind coming into this area from the south. Now, the big thing here is that, you know, we're creating a living windbreak, and you can see there's quite a bit of stuff on the go down here. Now, the dark green stuff is actually existing trees. They're actually trees that have been here for a long time. They're great trees. They do help with some wind, but we need to create multiple layers here in order to really deflect that wind off this incoming wind coming in through this area. So luckily we reached out to the Prairie Shelter Belt program. They have a massive amount of shelter belt based trees, and they have recommendations for planting and kind of distances and stuff between them. So along here we're looking at a variety of trees, sea buckthorn, we're looking at lilac, we're looking at including service berries, western choke cherries, in basically this kind of living windbreak. Now these are planted at 3 foot centers, so as they grow, they will tend to form, kind of a thicket that will be, somewhat penetrable by the wind because these are deciduous, trees. They will all grow to slightly different heights, but they will form basically a lower living windbreak than the next row. So the next row is an arrangement of elm, Okanese poplar, and willow. And the idea here is that I chose varieties I knew were going to grow fast in our area. They're varieties that people, have used here, and they grow really fast to be able to establish. Now, luckily, a lot of these varieties in here, they can be pollarded, which means that you can cut them off like 3, 4, 5 feet above ground, and they will actually form a new top by sending out sprouts. So that's a way to control some of these and to be able to kind of, trim them down as they grow. The other option is that they can be coppiced. So in a coppice, the tree is cut down fairly close to the ground level, and then that actually promotes the growth of new shoots out from the roots, and it forms basically a stool at ground level, and the coppices kind of grow up and form individual branches or trees. And these can be continually just harvested. And luckily, there are some species in here I think are going to be useful, like the willow we're planning on using and harvesting regularly. So that will go all the way along this south edge. So you see this is the lower part of the windbreak. This is the next highest part of the windbreak that will be harvested as necessary. So some years we may take, let's say, every elm tree, like in 5 year period, then we'll wait for X number of years and we'll take every second tree, and that'll help, I think, basically manage this forest is kind of the plan. So there's some areas here that are going to require some extra living windbreaks, and I can always add more as I see fit once we get these growing, and we can take cuttings and stuff out of them. All of this area down here is going to be a living windbreak, and once again, it's the same varieties as we had planted here. They can all be pollarded or coppiced in order to be able to manage them and to provide valuable wood. Actually, we burn wood. It's something that that we're not going to be able to get enough to burn in a year, but it's stuff that we're growing on our own property, which will be great. And given that I have so much more property available, it's quite possible that I could start propagating some of these varieties so that I can produce some of my own firewood locally. So that's kind of the plan right now for this particular area. And looking at these individual food forest areas, as well as as well as altering the unmanaged zones in such a way that I create windbreaks to help with some of the wind that's actually incident on the property from the southern exposure. All right, guys, so that's it for this video. This one is going to actually be broken up into multiple parts. Part 1 was the master plan. Part 2 basically is going to cover all of our choices and why we chose them. So I'd like to thank you for joining us today. If you found this informative and useful, leave comments below. You can, give us a thumbs up and subscribe to the YouTube channel. You can reach out and follow us on Instagram and Twitter at FR_homestead, as well as on Facebook at the Homestead at Flatrock. Thanks for joining us today, and we're going to see you guys next time.